Hey, so I've been vegan for 10 years. I've eaten predominantly whole plant foods for each of those 10 years. There's been no time where I've said, well, I'm not sure about what I'm doing here. I think I'm missing a trick by not having animal products anymore and gone back. So this really has been a 10-year true consistent experiment for me. And so in this video, I want to break down the changes that I've observed, my health, my energy, in my physique also, and the results might just surprise you. So we're going to do the good, the bad, the ugly today. Let's get into it. First up though, very quickly, meal of the day. If you're new, this is what we do. I should say, really, appetizer of the day. This is something I do before my evening meal or on the side of dinner, and it's just a big mixed salad. Frankly, it's whatever I've got left over, and it's looking nice and colourful, but it's, you know, it's not always quite so pretty and pretentious looking, I must concede. We are, though, sadly today missing the magical sprouts, which really bring this together nicely texture-wise, I find, but also nutritionally. Sprouts, absolutely incredible, my highest recommendation. But anyway, what we're working with today is rocket or arugula for my friends across the pond. We've got watercress in here. I don't know how much you'll make out of all of this, folks. We've got our cherry toms, of course. We've got some pickled red cabbage, which I love. Got a couple of radishes chopped up and thrown there. We've got half an apple in there. I think that's about it. A sprinkling of hemp seed and, of course, some balsamic glaze. You could have always used, of course, balsamic vinegar if you're looking for a lower calorie option. Now, one of the first things I noticed when I started eating more meals like this, switched to a plant-based diet 10 years ago, just how much my physique was changing, and I think in a way that I didn't necessarily expect. And transparently, part of my motives for adopting this lifestyle, it certainly became ethical later on, and sort of a deeper health and well-being motivation there as well. My acne that I've talked about extensively on this channel years ago, that was really bad at the time, and I heard very positive testimonials about cutting out dairy. Research I did on that said that might be a wise move. So I had these other lingering motives, let's say, but definitely weight loss absolutely was a huge one after that progressive body fat gain in my university years. That was a motive to me. And so I think I had a hope that this would help, but almost as well at the same time I was kind of probably imagining it back then as just the next thing I was trying in a long list of different diets on the old weight loss roundabout merry-go-round that every dieter seems to go through as a bit of a rite of passage early on in their journey. And so I think, yeah, the hope was there that this would work, but I wouldn't say necessarily the belief. And so when I, within the first week, have that 3 to 4 pound weight loss, and I am kind of jumping for joy on one hand, but on the other hand, I am kind of holding my feet on the ground and saying, well, it's just week one, you've seen this kind of thing before, could be a lot of water weight, you know, rightly playing devil's advocate with that. Well, the fact that 12 weeks in, I was almost 10 kilos down, that for me was astonishing. And that's not a ridiculously, it's not slow weight loss, but it's not ridiculously fast weight loss either for somebody that was kind of as active as me back then with my stats. That's nothing ridiculous to write home about, but it was for me. Right? It's relative. It was for me at the time to finally have something that I could stick with for more than like 2-week diet bursts, which is like my whole gym bro years, 18, 19 through 21 at university. Yes, I was progressively gaining weight, building a bit of muscle, gym bro, but I was also stacking on body fat. But then I'd have like month periods of time where I was like, right, I've got to get lean now, fat loss. I had 10 fat loss attempts through those 2 or 3 years that lasted 3, maybe max 4 weeks. That's generous. 2 weeks at a time. To do something that I could actually stick with for 3 months and then could yield this rate of returns, that was astounding to me. And so, yeah, I hoped that I'd lose weight eating this way. Yes, the research I did suggested it would be. It does make for a really compelling way to lose weight. Plant-based eating does make for a really compelling way to lose weight. But I still didn't necessarily believe I would be able to do it and stay full and satisfied and not have all of those negative symptoms of extreme dieting, calorie deficits, etc., that I had with kind of standard Western diet or just other diet approaches. So it did actually blow my mind. Now, of course, you have reality checks with all of this. After about 3 to 4 months, I hit that first plateau. So I have this astonishing weight loss, and then I have this plateau, and that forces me to consider more the role of caloric density, kind of go deeper with weight loss strategy. I'm learning month and month, year after month and month, not year after year. We're going way ahead there. A little bit more about plant-based nutrition, and so yeah, I have to get a little bit deeper with my knowledge, and the weight loss does continue, but it's at a much slower rate, excuse me. And then the subsequent 18 months or so, I only lose about 5 kilos, which is really, I say only, I was happy with it at the time, but it's really kind of slow progress knowing what I now know today and how I do it now. But I was delighted with it. I was delighted in particular to find something that I could actually stick to long term. And no, it's not, I must be transparent and balanced here. It's not a fair comparison, because when I was doing a standard Western diet, now I look back, I would do, this is not my intention, but I would do a standard Western diet with animal products 1,000,000 times better than I was back then. So it's not a fair comparison to say that plant-based diet was the only vehicle, it was the only thing that changed my physique. But I think it was a driving force. I think this did play a role, and it allowed me to improve in so many areas, but namely my consistency. I think that was the big difference maker. It was finally something felt like, wow, this is satisfying enough. Like, it's not always easy doing this weight loss thing, being in that deficit of calories, so my body goes to the body fat and uses that as fuel. That process, day in, day out, for months, years at a time, is not easy, don't get me wrong. But a plant-based approach was the first time where I was like, oh, I'm weirdly satisfied, to the extent that it's like imposter syndrome. And that's why these were not the results that I expected, even though they were the results I hoped for. To have something that felt so sustainable, massive relief. The second thing I noticed was my health markers improving. I appreciate there's an awful lot of anecdote here. I've got the data for some of the blood work, and that was really compelling to me. But I'm also kind of lumping in more intangible observations about things like digestion. Of course, my skin, like after 2 weeks without dairy, I would approximate that my acne was sort of 80% cleared up versus prior. That's like a pretty good instant win. Blood's perfect every year. That's a good reminder to me. You guys hold me accountable with stuff like this. I'm actually about 3 to 4 months behind on my annual blood work stuff because my timing of leaving the UK last summer. So I need to sort that out as proof in the pudding, really, for my practices here and just my own peace of mind. But just these, and I appreciate, yeah, anecdotal some of this stuff, but a lot of these health markers improving. Of course, this was not feedback I was getting initially, with the weight loss and the physique change, it's very obvious very quick. I'm talking more then about medium term. So this is more over months and months after my first few months being plant-based. Well, better digestion from day 2, better bowel movements from day 1. Maybe that's TMI, but better bowel movements from day 1, of course. But just this progressive, gradual improvement with my health markers. No deficiencies in the blood work because, well, I was about to say because I actually supplement properly. That's difficult. There's a lot of variables there. How much of it is the supplementation? How much of it is the diet? I wasn't doing blood work before as a comparison. Maybe my B12 was fine before switching plant-based anyway. And so now I'm looking at my B12 being an astonishing score, which is very easy to achieve, actually. It's nothing to write home about with supplementation. But maybe I'm now looking at that like, yes, my B12 is so fantastic. Wow. Maybe it was off the charts before anyway, so it's not particularly a decent comparison. But yeah, really, again, anecdotal, but feeling good, and on paper, with the data that I've gathered over the years doing this, it's all looking good internally too. Hesitant to include this one, but then I thought, sod it, to hell with it. This is my journey and my experience. But it's how much my relationship with food has transformed for the better with this way of eating. If you've been following me for some time, you know about these crazy binge eating days that I had. Again, university, it's a common theme in my story here. That's where I picked up an awful lot of my bad habits. And the big culprit for me was turning to food out of boredom. And then even after university, when I go into the working world, turning to food a little bit out of stress or kind of a reward coming home on the evening. Certainly a bit of reward eating at the weekends for getting through the successful week, patting myself on the back, and then going and eating 3,000 calories of cookies as some kind of, well, that's your treat for all your hard work. As if that's any treat for me and my body whatsoever. But this is the background I was coming from. Somebody, again, that had this crazy diet mentality where I just operate between swings of eating 3,500 calories a day, just completely over the top. And then when I wanted to lose weight, going to doing something ridiculous like 1,500 or 1,600 calories per day, which is absurd for someone with my stats. an activity level back then. This is the person that I was. I had a bad relationship with food, and yes, it didn't take me to classic definitions of obesity on the BMI scale, but I was well on that path. I was starting to get overweight, and I was well on that path. Like I say, 15 or 16 kilos heavier than I am today. And just puffy and bloated, etc. And anyway, that was the outcome of these really poor food habits. Now, again, I have to earnestly look at plant-based eating and say, can I credit plant-based eating with the massive turnaround that I've had in some of the mental and emotional aspect of food? Maybe, but I certainly can't give it all. I certainly can't give plant-based eating all the credit for my ability to be far more mindful now with my emotions. And when I have an emotion, not just immediately chowing down and breaking those behavior patterns over years and years and years. And doing other things that filled up my cup and made me happy and were more appropriate forms of stress relief than just smashing a box of 1,800 calories in a box of Pop-Tarts. I still remember that from back in the day. It's about 1,800 calories in a whole box of Pop-Tarts. Don't ask me how I know, you can predict. And to skip ahead 10 years here, because I'm just rambling now, and not like me, is it, to spiel endlessly in one of these videos. But yeah, skipping ahead 10 years, I don't obsess over food anymore. Again, I appreciate this is just my anecdotal experience. How can I give you hard data for this beyond the physique change, which I suppose is some evidence that relationship with food has improved here? But no, I don't obsess over food anymore. And whilst I'm not perfect, I just had my auntie and uncle here. I showed them around the city, and we had almond croissants and definitely had baked goods. I concede pistachio cake, that was it, another day. And we had svichkova. We tried some veganized Czech food that certainly doesn't really get the green light in terms of a healthy, nutritious and moderate caloried meal, that's for sure. But it is miles better. These crazy dramatic swings in my calorie intake, the wild binges, turning to food to deal with any emotional problem in my personal life, that is largely silenced. Although not perfectly, I'm happy to say that is largely silenced. Again, can I credit too much plant-based eating for this beyond all of the other steps that I've taken to develop a far more positive mindset, far more productive, healthy mindset around food? No, I can't lay too much credit at the feet of the door of plant-based eating versus the other stuff that I've done. That would be really biased to say plant-based eating totally fixed my relationship with food, entirely, exclusively responsible for my turnaround in relationship with food. No, that's really absurdly unfair and biased. But it has helped in many ways because it's allowed me to eat the big meals and feel really satisfied and still stay lean whilst eating carbohydrates, which was certainly not in my paradigm before and my consciousness before. Again, I can play devil's advocate with a lot of this because if I was doing a omnivorous diet, I would do it a lot better, a lot more sensibly. It's not, again, to be crystal clear, it's not my bloody intention, but I'd do it a lot better than I did 10 years ago, I must concede. So maybe I wouldn't have the same issue with the relationship with food now if I was still eating in this very hypothetical scenario where I was still eating animal products. So again, it's kind of an unfair comparison because I went plant-based and then I improved my relationship with food and I improved my nutrition understanding and knowledge kind of all progressively at the same time. So it's so hard to say it was one or the other thing that led to my success. But what I would say is this plant-based eating was a permanent vehicle in the times that my relationship with food significantly improved. So whilst it's not fair to give it all the credit, it's also certainly wouldn't be fair to say that it bears no responsibility for it whatsoever either, I feel. So that was a massive change. Reflection number 4 on my list here after this decade plant-based. I actually want to share with you some lessons now from these 10 years. Actually, a lot of these are things that I had to learn the hard way. I've talked about a lot of the positive changes that I noticed after switching to a plant-based diet so far, and I keep saying I want to be balanced, I want to be fair with this, right? So I promised the good, the bad, the ugly. Here's some of the ugly stuff that I learned the hard way. And none more spring to my mind when I talk about the negatives of plant-based eating than the social tension that it seems to cause a lot of people. Don't get me wrong, a lot of people are genuinely curious and they will quiz you about it in a really sincere way, and they do want to learn more about it, and they might even want to join you for some food sometime or take inspiration from what you're doing once they see your progress. But wow, the strange, bizarre energy that you're met with for doing something, and this is the odd juxtaposition, that in your heart it feels like the righteous, correct thing to do. And you've got to be tricky with that one, that you don't get dogmatic about that and too certain for your own good and your own ego, let's say. But in your heart, you're like, but I'm doing something that's so good for me health-wise. I'm doing something really, really ethical. What's happening in these slaughterhouses is unspeakable. I'm no longer partaking in that, thank you very much. So in your heart, you're so clear that this is something really, really positive for you and for others. And so when you're met with this like South Park caricature, comments about protein for the 1000th time. And again, there's nothing wrong with people asking, again, sincere and genuine questions. But you will also pick up on, whether it is unspoken or it's made crystal clear to you, quite a nasty judgment at times. And it's important we don't victimize ourselves to this and become so intolerant and unsteady in the face of any kind of questioning or social tension. That's important. But this still shocks you at first, because again, in your heart, you're like, oh, I'm so clear, this is something right for me, and it's right for others involved in the food process as well, and the food manufacturing process as well, animal agriculture. And yeah, surely it's win-win, right? Surely everyone in my family and all my friends will understand that. Even if I don't go and preach it to them, when I quietly order my vegan option, surely they're kind of just going to get that. No, this really rubs people up the wrong way, and it reveals a lot of the insecurities they have about their own diet, and they also have, in many cases, this is certainly not the majority of people, but you're going to encounter this. It's important to be realistic about it, but you're going to experience this weird social tension where you can feel, whether spoken or not, often it is spoken, whether it comes through or not, you can almost feel, and I do believe your gut picks up on these reactions from people, again, even if none of it is verbalized, you can feel when people think you're morally judging them. And that creates a really bizarre dynamic between the two of you in some of these conversations. And buckle up for that. This is a whole video in itself. The first thing I'd say is you don't owe anyone but yourself an explanation for what you're doing. So if you're not willing to entertain conversations about why you're vegan, why you're at least moving, maybe you're not vegan, but moving in a plant-based direction, don't. You don't owe anybody but yourself that explanation. And you certainly don't owe it from any apologetic frame. And actually what you'll find is sometimes the more defensive sounding that you are, on the back foot you feel, that's actually when you communicate your least productively about plant-based eating and about your veganism. So sometimes it's better to just stay quiet and back out of the conversation. But again, it's important not to cower and not to be intolerant of the risk of social tension when these subjects come up at the same time. So yeah, again, this is a whole nother video, and I've covered it before with tons and tons of advice on this. But I think really, so I'm not giving too many practical steps in this one, but you don't owe anyone an explanation for this. This is going to come up. If you don't want to get into rebutting people when they ask about protein and B12 because you don't feel that steady in your knowledge of vegan nutrition yet, don't. You don't need to entertain that. Just say, hey, just quietly and respectfully, when someone asks, don't push it, but when someone asks, quietly and respectfully say, hey, look, I don't know everything about this yet. I'm still kind of learning more about this lifestyle, but I've got to say I feel really good right now. And also helps if you can flex a result, because people are fickle. So when you tell them that you've lost 10 pounds and you're feeling really good, people do kind of go stum. They do kind of go, oh, well, I don't get it, but respect. I wouldn't do it. I thought the keto thing, oh, there's too many carbs. I'm not sure about your lack of protein. What about B12? They might not resonate deeply to the degree that they would entertain this lifestyle, but they'll go, oh, fair enough, it seems to be working for you. People are pretty fickle when you start flexing results like that. It's like saying doctor's orders, because of the credibility doctors have. I'm not commenting rightly or wrongly. You can imagine some of my views on that, though. That's for damn sure if you've been following me for some time. But yeah, rightly or wrongly, like, people are fickle, so you go doctor's orders, or you go, well, I've lost 10 pounds, even if it's with Ozempic, and people are like, oh, must be a good thing then. It depends on the method, doesn't it? But yeah, you don't owe anyone an explanation to this, and if you don't want to get into debate, you don't have to. Just quietly cite your results and maybe some of your reasons for doing this without going on too much, and keep it concise, and trust your instinct. If somebody is kind of badgering you and you can sense they're just trying to do like a got you thing, you don't need to entertain that. If you sense somebody is being really curious and really respectful in asking you about this, have a nice conversation with them about it. Next lesson from these 10 years, carbs are not the enemy. Wow, I had to do a lot of that anti-carb deprogramming when I first found this way of eating, and it took a while. But what did give me peace of mind was greater understanding of just how few calories are actually in carbohydrate compared to fat. 4 calories per gram versus 1 gram of fat. You may have heard this previously. I'm certainly not the first person to say this online. Versus, anyway, excuse me, got sidetracked. 9 calories in 1 gram of fat versus 4 calories in 1 gram of carbohydrate. What am I trying to say there? Well, carbohydrates in theory, per gram at least, have, I say in theory, this is correct, have less than half the amount of calories as the equivalent amount of fat, the fat macronutrient. So, and protein is the same as carbohydrates for the record too. So that's the first thing. I remember hearing that and going, oh, okay, that just gives me a little bit of peace of mind that I can trust myself to eat rice again, and that it doesn't automatically turn to body fat, especially let alone if I'm in a calorie deficit anyway. And then I think a bit more understanding of the role that fiber played. And, thinking about more fiber-rich carbohydrate options, which I was not doing previously. I was thinking of carbs as pizza and potato chips, when really those things do definitely contain, to be clear, the carbohydrate macronutrient, but they're filled with a bunch of other nonsense as well, and fat, and protein and oils and additives, etc. They're not, again, people use the macronutrients as food groups. So they say carbs and proteins and fats, and like when they say proteins, they're referring to meat. When they say carbs, they're referring to anything that contains the carbohydrate macronutrient. I just think it's really poor labeling. I think there's food groups on one hand, and I think there's macronutrients. I don't think they're interchangeable. Anyway, we're getting lost in technicalities there. That's one of my criticisms of online nutrition teaching. So let's not get sidetracked with that one, but I just think some peace of mind that, okay, and there are foods that are really high in carbohydrate, and they are so different from pizza and potato chips, which also contain lots of other things. And also learning that vegetables I didn't know this. I didn't know this for ages, that vegetables were predominantly carbohydrate. And then I was like, carbs can't be automatically bad if vegetables, the vast majority of vegetable is the carbohydrate macronutrient. That just doesn't make sense to me. And so then going deep with the role of fiber, etc., and having other things added too, because a lot of people take a carb-rich meal, they add loads of other nasties to it that infinitely blow up the calories, they're adding the saturated fat on there, etc., and then they sit there and they go, carbs are bad, carbs made me fat. It's like, mate, you ate like 1,000 calories in a pasta dish, but it also, yes, it had pasta, but it also had cream and cheese and bacon. Like, and you're just like, carbs made me fat. It's like just such a simplistic analysis. So carbs aren't the enemy, and actually still now to this day, 50 to 55%, of my daily calorie totals come from the carbohydrate macronutrient. I eat a predominantly carbohydrate-based diet, and I've had no problem leaning down over these years. The other big lesson here is consistency over extremes. And again, can I credit plant-based eating? I did earlier to my consistency. Yes, I can. I think it's played a huge role. But also, so is fixing my mindset. So is engaging in other healthy habits with exercise, for example, as well. So is just generally improving the state of my life to where I've become a happier and more fulfilled person, thankfully, with each passing year. And I'm sure it won't always be linear, and it doesn't always feel linear. But generally speaking, with each passing year, I've become a happier, more fulfilled person. This is less turning to food. It's less laziness. It's less, completely debilitating self-pity about the way I look or my health, so I just victimize myself and give in and say, oh, it's not all worth the drop. Like, that's just the opposite of the person that I've become. Thankfully, I would like to think I've become in these 10 years or so. So yeah, plant-based eating isn't entirely responsible for these things, but it has allowed a greater level of consistency. And just realizing that consistency beats those short bursts of perfection, all those extremes, all that aggressive dieting. And actually, yeah, in the short term, the aggressive diets win, and that's why they're appealing, because you can get this big instant win within like 2 weeks. But everyone judges themselves on such a short timeline with weight loss. And this is with weight loss and muscle gain as well, but specifically I see this with weight loss, and they're just on this roller coaster where it's like, well, when they get really fast weight loss, that validates the method. Whereas what I say to myself now is, where will that method take me in a year's time? Not 1 month's time. That's what validates the value of a method to me, because again, it implies that there's some kind of sustainability there, and sustainability wins along with simplicity. And that's another thing as well. Like, there's so many different sub-diets under the plant-based umbrella. So easy to get lost in raw veganism, the 50-50 plate starch solution, maybe more like my approach. Like, my approach is something slightly different as well from those other approaches. So I'm not free from this. But really, the way I treat this is I'm eating whole plant foods. And over the years, the goalposts are going to shift. And I'm going to be more interested in one little variation in my diet than another. And I might lower the fat or go higher with the fat, etc., etc. There might be years where I'm more on the ball with my calorie intake than not, for example. Or might be years where, I don't know, I'm leaning more towards nutritarian. I talked about sprouts earlier, and I'm really vegetable and micronutrient focused. And then there's years where maybe less so, rightly or wrongly. And so I'm going to take these little kind of swings, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm still eating whole plant foods, and the rest of it is just infighting and minutia. I'm still going in the right direction. My health markers are still really great. All the anecdotal stuff that I know is hard to trust because it's still anecdote. I'm looking at myself in the mirror and like, this is good. The acne isn't really coming back that much. Like, this is all validation. This is all proof to me. Some of it is subjective. You've got to be tricky with it. It is tricky to analyze at times, but a lot of this is evidence to me that, yeah, this is working and we really are going in the right direction. And so it's those feedback systems that incentivize you. I've lost my point slightly. But yeah, all about sustainability, whole plant foods eating, keep it simple. And also this idea of just having that little bit of flexibility. I ditched my whole foods puritanism about 6 months into plant-based when I realized this ain't ever gonna work, this ain't ever gonna last, and it's just not gonna be real. I've had a really good start to this way of eating, and that's really spurred me on and really sold me, really pitched me on it. But at the same time, like, how am I going to navigate trips, vacations, meals out, life stuff, if I can't just bend the rules a little bit for me? And so just giving myself permission without going totally off the rails to, you know, have sometimes those more processed foods. I talked about almond croissants earlier and going out to eat and something oily. A lot of the things that are really, really treasonous, according to some people that do great work in my space, admittedly, but treasonous compared to, you know, the plant-based, lots of plant-based teachers versus what lots of other plant-based approaches say. And I just look at this like, I mean, they're not wrong. I can't sit here and say oil is fine, but at the same time, if once every week or two I go out to eat rather than making a home-cooked meal, and there's a little bit of oil on an otherwise relatively healthy meal out. I'm not having a burger. I'm having their nice superfood salad in most cases. Last week was not representative of how I usually like to eat out. But when I go for sushi or I have my poke bowls out, like, these things are not perfect. There's some hidden calories. There's a little bit of oil on much of this stuff. But generally, directionally, we're talking about whole plant foods with a bit of dressing on or a bit of oil here and there. Do I really want to hold myself to such an absurd standard that is treason, that is heresy in the whole foods plant-based, under the whole foods plant-based criteria? No. And so it's that ability to just tweak and take, you know, what is taught to us, what we can learn from this amazing sort of plant-based, Puritan plant-based textbook, and take that and just make it a little bit more realistic, practical, and flexible for my lifestyle. This is a critical piece of the puzzle, I think, that's allowed me to do this for 10 years, and I did make some mistakes with it by being too perfect at times. And then, of course, obviously, because I'm human, I swing in the other direction too sometimes, where I'm like, oh, now I'm veering too much away from the principles that have changed my life. I don't feel quite as lean and sharp. Taiwan and Japan is a good example of this last year, where I did 6 months in Asia last year, and generally speaking, excuse me, my lighting just changed, I've got to go in a sec. Generally speaking, my diet was really good, maintained my weight very, very good, despite doing 6 months in Asia, like traveling. It's pretty good going, I was really pleased with it. The back end of Japan, Taiwan, I was like, I'm getting a little bit fluffy now, let's dial it back, and that pushes you back in the other direction. So yeah, swings and roundabouts, I'm not always perfect with this, but that ability to just tweak, or that ability to move back in the direction of maybe following more of the rules and getting more structure again, and then times where I need to be a little bit more flexible because that suits my life in that moment, and good enough is truly good enough without being perfect for brief moments, for temporary spells. Yeah, that is the sort of really experienced, advanced stuff that people learn, I think, in, like, after maybe their first initial years being plant-based, that's the stuff you start to learn. That's really where the magic happens, and you start thinking, oh, I have no reason to ever go back now because, like, I've done this in the real world, and every circumstance, I know I can really make this work for life. I'm through that initial phase. I know I can make this for life. It's really actually battle proven. I've done it for long enough, so it's already time tested. It's worked for a couple of years, but now it's battle proven. It's hardened. I've tried this in the real world. And so that's it. These are my big reflections after a decade eating this way. And I think, as I said from the outset, I think the results have surprised me. I think they have. In fact, I'm actually playing that down for fear of, I don't know why I'm censoring myself like this, but maybe for fear of sounding like overly dogmatic to the extent that it sounds really biased. But the results have more than surprised me, right? They've actually blown my mind when I think about it. I was always hopeful, like I said, about this way of eating and that it would lead to a turnaround in my health and well-being, but actually it's blown my mind. And I don't know if we went back 10 years and said, right, you're still going to be doing this in 10 years' time, and this is how you're going to look, and this is how you're going to feel, and you're going to have a whole business dedicated to helping other people with it. I think I probably would say, nah, I don't think so, mate. Nah, you're having me on that. I don't think so. I think I probably did actually, I was serious about it, don't get me wrong. That's why I went into it with conviction 10 years ago. But I think I probably did maybe partly imagine, part of my expectation management back then was, yeah, this is just my next diet phase or the next thing I'm trying, as I know so many people will resonate with, like I said, the dieter's mentality, the diet roundabout. So yeah, damn pleased that it's stuck and that it served me in the way that it has. And it's difficult because I think there's so many small, again, this is what I was going to say earlier, so many small improvements. I don't have an amazing before and after transformation, 100-pound weight loss or anything major, but I've had so many small improvements in my health over these 10 years. It's hard to attribute all of them to plant-based eating, so I want to remain balanced on that, but it's certainly been, I think, in hindsight, an important piece of the puzzle. If you want to take all the guesswork out of being plant-based, using this diet to get in your best shape ever, like I've been fortunate enough to do over these 10 years, that's exactly what I teach my now 600 plus clients over these last 6 years since I've been coaching inside my Vegan Slim and Sustain program. And I'm really excited to announce actually that we've got the new message only tier. Same results, same Slim and Sustain structure, strategy, one-on-one accountability and support. It's just message only now, so it's without the calls. And this is win-win because for me, I wanted a little bit of my time back after the busiest year so far running this program, which is a good thing, but I want a little bit more time back. And after 2,000 coaching calls, I'm I'm ready to take a couple of months off the coaching conversations for now. But it's win-win in that this also allows me to slash the price quite considerably because there's less demand on my time. So if you've been on the fence about Vegan Slim and Sustain, working with me for some time, and you've kind of been waiting for an opportunity, this might well be the time to do it at a much lower price point. So I'll put the links in the description box to learn more about my program there. See you in the next one.